This video is going to be over the chemical bonds you're responsible for on the exam. You should know that a chemical bond is the attraction between electrons of two or more atoms, and you should know the difference between a molecule and a compound. You should also know how to read the molecular formula that we discussed in class. We worked through the exercise where we looked at cellular respiration, breaking down glucose. And so, of course, go back through and take a look at that particular reaction and make sure you can count up the individual atoms that are comprising each molecule in that reaction. The idea here is to understand the differences between the types of chemical bonds that you see in Table 2.3. Ionic bonds themselves, as we said, are relatively weak. They're attractions between ions, and of course, they're easily disrupted in water. So this is why we talk about them being associated with salts or electrolytes within our body. Another way to think of an ionic bond is a bond that occurs as electrons are exchanged or transferred between atoms. So, of course, this exchange results in cations, those that are going to lose an electron, thus having more protons than electrons, giving the atom an overall positive charge, or could result in anions, those that are going to be negatively charged because they gain an electron typically, meaning the number of electrons is going to outnumber the number of protons, giving them an overall negative charge. This reaction between sodium and chlorine atoms is a great example of an ionic bond. As we can see here, sodium has a valence shell that's only holding one electron, a lot of energy expended in order to maintain that one electron, and so that's not very efficient. Chlorine, on the other hand, almost has a full valence shell. It really only needs one electron to have that. So as a result, an ionic bond is going to allow sodium to donate this one electron to the chlorine valence shell, basically giving chlorine in itself a full valence shell and then eliminating the need for this outermost shell for sodium. And of course, if you look below it, now the new valence shell is full. And so these are two unreactive atoms at this point in time. But of course, that exchange results in ionization of them. So the sodium ion is a cation, and this chloride ion, now chloride instead of chlorine, is an anion. Of course, ionic bonds in themselves have a number of roles within the body. You're responsible for understanding why these are important here in our body. Again, noting the fact that osmotic gradients are those which are going to be associated with the movement of water and the distribution of water within our compartments in the body. Of course, understanding here that they're important for electrical current is going to be important for understanding how the nervous system and then how muscles work later on in this semester. I do want you to know Table 2.2, understanding how one particular molecule, like calcium chloride, written CaCl2, could be broken down into cations and anions. The next type of bond we look at is a covalent bond. If ionic is associated with the exchange of electrons, covalent bonds are those associated with sharing of electrons. These are stronger bonds than what we see with ionic bonds. The number of bonds that you see is going to be named here as either a single, a double, and in some cases a triple covalent bond. And so, of course, you take a look at the number of electrons in each shell, here with one hydrogen atom and a second, noting that the innermost electron shell of an atom can hold 2 electrons. These 2 hydrogen atoms are going to form a single covalent bond, so that they're both going to share those 2 electrons. And this essentially fools the 2 atoms into thinking that they have a full valence shell, but giving the ability to be unreactive at this point, as long as they're bound to one another. Since this is one pair of electrons, we say it's one single covalent bond. In carbon dioxide, you see here is an atom of oxygen, a second atom of oxygen, and an atom of carbon in the middle. If you notice here, each one of these atoms is going to need a full valence shell so that you could count up a total of 8 electrons. And in order to do that, carbon and oxygen are going to share 2 pairs of electrons, while this same carbon is also sharing 2 pairs of electrons with a second neighboring oxygen atom. So written like this, you can see that carbon is going to form double bonds on either side, resulting in the molecule carbon dioxide. A few other examples here. This one gives you an example of a triple covalent bond. So two nitrogen atoms sharing 1, 2, 3 pairs of electrons in order to present this idea that they have full valence shells with 8 electrons in each. And so that's the idea of a triple covalent bond. Now, in addition to this, you need to understand the difference between a nonpolar and a polar covalent bond. So beginning with nonpolar, these are going to be those in which electrons are equally attracted to both nuclei of the atom, that is. They could be single or double, and these are very strong types of chemical bonds. A polar covalent bond is that one in which the electrons are more attracted to one nucleus than to the other. And so you have an unbalanced type of bond. And of course, what this does is alter the charge of the overall molecule. This is going to give you one region that's more positive and one region that's more negative of the molecule. So in looking at how this is going to affect the three-dimensional representation of the molecule, we look at a single bond between two carbon atoms. They are going to be sharing electrons equally, and we know that because they are the same atom, so one is not going to have a greater pull on the other. And so this would be an example of a nonpolar covalent bond. Now, when you look down here at a bond between two different atoms, you would see here an oxygen, here a hydrogen. Oxygen is a relatively large atom with a lot of pull on neighboring electrons, and so we refer to him as electronegative, and it's denoted by this symbol right here. Just a greater gravitational force, if you will, on neighboring electrons like those associated with hydrogen. Hydrogen, because it has less of a pull on those electrons that are nearby, we refer to it as electropositive. Because you have an unequal sharing of electrons here between oxygen and hydrogen, this kind of a single bond would be referred to as a polar covalent bond. Now, as you would see this represented in space, oftentimes balance among a molecule, like one that's nonpolar, like carbon dioxide, means that that molecule is going to be more or less linear or balanced three-dimensionally in space. A water molecule, on the other hand, with this very large electronegative oxygen and two smaller electropositive hydrogens, is not going to be in a straight line in space. It is going to be bent, with that electronegative oxygen taking up the greatest amount of space. So this is a great example of a polar molecule. Now, I do want you to memorize the fact that water is polar, and I want you to memorize that carbon dioxide is a nonpolar covalent molecule. We're going to come back to those types of molecules pretty soon, but make sure you understand the definitions as presented here. We also have hydrogen bonds that are going to be weak attractions between polarized molecules or polarized regions of the same molecule. And this is going to be pretty important as we take a look at the effect of water on the body. So again, a water molecule, very polar in nature, having an electronegative region and two electropositive regions, can be attracted to a number of things nearby. And so you would see right here, this negatively or electronegative oxygen can be attracted to electropositive regions of other atoms, such as other water molecules. And these electropositive regions here can be attracted to other electronegative regions of neighboring water molecules as well. And so we find that these hydrogen bonds, namely these existing within water, are going to be responsible for a number of the properties we associate with water in our body. We also find that hydrogen bonds are associated with the bonding of the two strands of the DNA double helix. So while a hydrogen bond might be very weak individually, we find that when you put them together collectively, they tend to be very strong, which is why they're ideal for forming your DNA double helix. And then, of course, van der Waals forces. These are very brief attractions, as it says here, due to random disturbances in electron clouds of adjacent atoms. This is the weakest of all the things that we look at, and it's going to be responsible for the ability of proteins within fluid solutions to actually wrap up into condensed structures. This is also the kind of force that's responsible for making your saran wrap stick to any kind of a glass bowl, or for allowing insects or other animals to actually cling to surfaces that would otherwise appear to be smooth. We'll just go ahead and say this is the way Spider-Man gets around. And that's the end of the video over chemical bonds. We'll have a second video over water and mixtures.